And with that, let me get to our guest. Hopefully he's still online. Etienne Peterschmitt, the representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization in Somalia. Mr. Peterschmitt, please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you. Greetings. Nice to see you.
Nice meeting you, and thanks very much for inviting me to this briefing. Just hold on. I'm having a small issue with my connection. Just can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. All right. Thanks again for the invitation to speak today. It's actually very timely as we are about to celebrate World Food Day in Somalia. We have celebrated it in Rome HQ today, but our celebration in Somalia will be on Sunday. This year's call for action to leave no one behind comes at a very critical juncture for global food security, and obviously even more so in the current drought context we are witnessing in Somalia, as the window for famine prevention is closing very fast. We have about 6.7 million Somalis, including over 300,000 people who are classified as IPC 5. We were referring earlier on in Haiti, IPC 5. So we have 300,000 people in Somalia, jumping from 130 a few months back. So these people are facing famine condition. Approximately half of those that are facing famine are actually in rural and hard to reach areas. We know that we have over 1 million people that have now been displaced, of which 80% of these displaced people are women and children. The coping capacity of the most vulnerable has now been exhausted, obviously. Rural areas need urgent humanitarian assistance between now and December and beyond, as we will see later. We know that famine is expected in 2 districts of Baidoa and Burakaba. This is in Southwest State, further down in Somalia, the southern part of Somalia. Clearly, if assistance doesn't reach the most vulnerable in these areas immediately, we will be in a famine situation. The current drought is the worst that we have seen in the last 4 decades. It has affected about 7.8 million people. So that just put things in perspective, this is about half of Somalia's population. 90% of the country is facing extreme drought. Women and girls are being forced to trek much longer distances to access water, shelter, which also makes them more vulnerable to gender-based violence. Now, again, to put things in perspective also, we have now 1.8 million children under 5 that will likely face acute malnutrition through mid-2023. That includes about over 513,000 to be specific, who are expected to be severely malnourished. Of course, we should not wait for a famine declaration to act, because then it will be too late. We know from 2011, when we faced a famine situation and a famine declaration, that by the time the famine was declared, half of the 260,000 people who died had actually already died. So even if no famine emerges, given the rising death rate in many of the areas, I mentioned these 2 districts, but issues are affecting the whole of the country. With the last calculation on the likely duration of the crisis, we know that the cumulative level of excess mortality could be as high as 2011. We have had 4 consecutive failed or below average rainfall seasons. So we have, we know that the current drought in Somalia is now surpassing the 2010-2011 and the 2016-2017 droughts in terms of duration, but also severity. And to that, I would like to add that we are now going through the 5th rainy season, which is also below average. We are still in the middle of the rainy season, but so far it's been a poor and a kind of a failed rainy season. There is even a prospect of possibly a sixth failed rainy season, but that will be something we'll be able to assess better closer to the months of March. Poor rainfall and intense dry conditions have led to acute water shortages, substantial reduction in crop cultivation, failed harvest, and the loss of more than 3 million livestock, essential to Somalia's pastoral and agro-pastoral livelihood system. Now, the livestock export is one of the major income in terms of GDP. So needless to say that the loss of so many livestock has a tremendous impact on the Somali economy. This is, of course, further exacerbated by escalating staple food prices and the conflict. In support of government efforts, and here I'd like to mention also the appointment of the Special Envoy for the Drought. I think you referred to this earlier on, as well as the setting up of the Somalia Disaster Management Agency. So in support of those government efforts, the humanitarian partners have actually managed to scale up assistance to help save lives. So by the end of August, we had reached up to 5.7 million drought-affected people who had received humanitarian assistance. That's a very significant increase from where we were just a couple of months back. FAO specifically has reached approximately 700,000 people between January and August this year with life-saving and livelihood assistance. And we are continuing our scale up with the aim to reach up to 1.4 million people. But the scale of assistance currently being delivered and funding from the international community is not yet sufficient to protect those most at risk. Just maybe to give you also, again, an interesting figure, also to put things in perspective. Saving and protecting livelihoods save lives, but livelihood supports is disproportionately underfunded. Yet every $1 you spend on protecting rural livelihood saves approximately $10 in food-related assistance for displaced families. Direct cash transfer to vulnerable rural families through FAO's cash, what we call the Cash Plus program, is assisting rural communities to address their immediate needs while helping mitigate livelihood collapse. The mobile money transfer have seen FAO reach 31 out of the 35 hard-to-reach or inaccessible areas of the country. Also, an emergency livestock treatment campaign has helped families maintain productive assets that are critical for the food security and nutrition of vulnerable families, especially those with young children. And I think it's also important here to make the link with the fact that the drought, not only have we witnessed loss of livestock, but we've also witnessed a reduction in or complete absence of milk production due to the disruption of reproduction cycle for small ruminants and camels. Now, given the worsening drought condition and the looming famine, the Somalia Humanitarian Response Plan for 2022 has been revised from 1.46 billion to 2.26 billion. So that's in light of the situation and the fact that we are now facing a fifth consecutive below average rain season. Of course, the caseload has gone up. FAO is appealing for 268 million in its famine prevention plan in order to reach about 2.34 million extremely vulnerable people in rural communities. We are providing support as closely as possible to affected community, which helps to keep families together during the crisis, prevents displacement. And we know that even prior to the drought, Somalia was one of the fast urbanizing countries in the world. So it does prevent displacement, but it also reduces psychological and physical risk and paves the way for a faster path to recovery. I also like to mention that the work of FAO is of course important, but what is really essential to highlight is the multi-sectoral nature of the assistance that is imperative if we are to have an effective response. So while cash transfer that are provided in a safe and timely manner enable people to access their basic needs across all sectors, coordination with all partners remains crucial to ensuring provision of complementary multi-sectoral assistance in order to address not only food, but nutrition, water, and health needs. For instance, we're doing water tracking now for survival, but that equally supports the livestock and family. Coming back to my earlier point, bringing assistance to rural areas as close as possible to affected communities will prevent massive displacement and will obviously facilitate a faster recovery once the crisis ends. The drought-affected rural Somalis are the human face of the global climate emergency. As humanitarians focus on saving lives, on averting famine, there's also a critical need to invest in livelihoods, resilience, infrastructure development, climate adaptation, and durable solutions to ensure that those affected can adapt and thrive in the future. I'll finish by saying that, unlike a famine declaration that is reflective of a collective failure, famine projection, as it is now, is a call for urgent action before it is too late. We have a very narrow window of opportunity to act in order to prevent what could otherwise become a full-fledged famine in Bay region, but possibly in other parts of the country. We obviously must not let that happen. We can't let that happen. While the famine projection implies that special attention and priority be given to Bay region, urgent scaling up of assistance is also required in other parts of the countries where the situation is equally worse. Let me stop here and I'll be happy to take up questions. Thank you.
Much. I'll turn over the floor. Please identify yourself to our speaker. First question goes to Edie.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-up questions on how much money is actually needed. You spoke first about the main appeal going up to $2.26 billion. How much has been received and how much is needed to avert famine in Baidoa and the Bay region? That's first.
All right. Yeah. No, thanks for the question. Okay, we don't, in the humanitarian response plan, we don't necessarily isolate the situation in the Bay region. We look at the country as a whole. So in terms of the funding received so far, and I speak here more on behalf of OCHA, it is slightly above 1 billion. Of funding received as of today now. With the new target of 2.2 billion, obviously we are still short of funding. And that funding again is really looking at covering the four essential clusters, which is food security, health, water and sanitation, and nutrition. So the level of funding is unequal amongst the three clusters, but unless we manage to get funding that covers the needs and the requirement for all of this cluster, we'll have a sort of a disproportionate assistance provided.
Right, and on the $258 million that FAO is seeking, how much have you gotten?
We have received, as of today, we do have funding in pipeline. We have received about 24%. Now, maybe just to make a general point, in total, from the food security cluster appeal in the humanitarian response plan, of the funding received, about 21% was allocated to what we call livelihood support, The rest was more direct assistance, cash assistance, and in kind in terms of food aid. But we do have funding coming in. I can't necessarily yet mention it because we need to have a final confirmation. But I certainly need to acknowledge the huge contribution from the US government so far globally in Somalia, funding different sectors. I think they stepped in big time, and equally so, some of the pipeline funding we have is also coming from the US government. So hopefully, if the pipeline does materialize, we'll probably look into a smaller funding shortfall, possibly within the range of maybe 30%, 40%. But then also, I need to emphasize here that the drought is here to stay. Even if the climatic drought is fixed by virtue of the rain finally coming, the impact of the drought will last for long, especially in the livestock sector. When we had the drought in 2017, we were supporting livestock communities, pastoralists, for up to 3 years after 2017, because it takes several years for people to recapitalize, to regain their lost assets. So for us, we're looking at the humanitarian crisis and its impact going way into 2023, and the humanitarian funding needs to be sustained so that we can also incorporate, in addition to direct humanitarian assistance, that livelihood resilient component that needs to come side by side with humanitarian assistance and life-saving.
James Bays from Al Jazeera. Can I ask you, given the real emergency you're dealing with, how much of an impact is the war in Ukraine in terms of the availability of stocks of grain, in terms of food prices, in terms of humanitarian funding? How much of the cake has gone to Ukraine and the emergency in Ukraine? And I guess lastly, in terms of the media spotlight.
All right, let me start with the last one on the media spotlight. Yeah, clearly, I was just listening just a few days ago, a survey that was made in the country member in the US, and it clearly showed that very few people were actually aware of what's happening in Somalia, because most of the focus and the media attention is very much geared towards Somalia. Towards the Ukraine crisis. Now, in terms of the funding, what funding we didn't receive, that's a difficult one. Not necessarily the best placed, but surely it has had an impact. But we should also look at the opportunity, maybe because of the crisis and its impact on countries like Somalia. This could also be an opportunity looking at specific funding that could be allocated to those countries because of the consequences of the conflict. Now, for us, the major impact was the increase of commodity in markets. Somali's markets are quite resilient. So despite the conflict, and even during COVID as well, when we had supply chain issues, markets were actually functioning. And this is why the humanitarian assistance is currently very much monetized. And thanks to those markets that are still functioning, what we are doing is injecting cash into the local economy, into those who need it the most, so that they can actually have this purchasing power to buy what they need. So in the case of FAO, we provide cash for people to buy inputs, but we also provide cash for what they need in terms of food, health, and other costs. It is possible. You might ask me, why are we asking to support rural communities when there is a drought? There are areas in the country where there is a bit of rain, There are people who live in riverine areas where it is possible to grow crops. There are some areas that are irrigated that do still have a bit of water. And on the livestock sector, it is important to continue livestock vaccination, livestock treatment to keep those livestock alive. Now, in terms of Somalia does import a large quantity of its cereal requirements. But when we look specifically in terms of the wheat, actually, this is not the main staple in Somalia. So the impact of the Ukraine crisis has been much more on the increase of prices in the market, but less so in the absence of supply of wheat. The staple is much more linked to maize consumption, for instance. Wheat is being consumed, but as processed food.
Okay. Yes, Ephraim?
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Ephraim Qusayfi from Arab News. You mentioned the difficulty of reaching rural areas that are hard to reach. Basically, I believe you mean that's because of inadequate road infrastructure, but also the security situation in those areas because of the control of Al-Shabaab on those areas. What is being done to overcome these two obstacles? That's my first question.
Okay. Again, one of the good thing about the monetization of our assistance, as I mentioned just now, is the fact that you can actually deliver assistance because it's mobile driven. You do cash through mobile money. That allows you to reach quite far and quite deep into those areas that are hard to reach. Out of the 35 districts that are classified as sort of hard to reach, FAO has managed to deliver assistance through cash in 31 of those. And that's also, just to put things in perspective, I think those areas represent about 10% of the population. So, of course, it is very important that we support those communities, but it's also to remind everyone that we have been struggling to provide assistance across the country in those areas, but even in areas where we don't have access constraints, it has been an issue to actually provide assistance. But you are correct; those areas are controlled by non-state actors. The government has also now launched a campaign, is very committed to fight Al-Shabaab, and is looking at ways to mobilize communities and to put in place mechanism whereby hopefully the influence and the presence of Al-Shabaab will be reduced and will allow greater access. Because again, the conditions we're facing now are of course linked to the drought, to the global increase in food prices, but insecurity, that's definitely a major issue.
Yes. Also, Mr. Peterschmitt, this is not the first appeal that warns of a famine in Somalia. Mr. Martin Griffith had already launched that appeal early in September. The special presidential envoy was here during UNGA. He was meeting with every mission possible to also make everyone aware of the situation. And 2.26 seems really little when we're watching trillions of dollars floating around the world right now. How do you explain the apathy in the humanitarian response to this famine? This is the third appeal maybe we're hearing now. How do you explain this apathy from the international community?
Well, that probably part of the answer goes back to the earlier question, probably the fact that there are competing crises in the world. Of course, we had COVID, and I mentioned that. We have had crises in other countries, I think Afghanistan. We have, and actually even in East Africa, I mean, we're talking about Somalia, but the crisis in East Africa, which is also drought related, is bad. We have now 26 million people in the Horn of Africa. That is basically three countries, South Sudan, Somalia, and Kenya, that are facing some forms of food insecurity. So I think it's been the fact that we've been facing competing crises with what is happening in other countries in the world, but overall, it's really I think the Ukraine crisis that has probably diverted the attention that we were hoping to get. Especially given the gravity of this drought, this is probably the worst drought ever. Yeah.
And one last one, sorry, Farhan. The presidential envoy, Mr. Warsami, also told The Guardian not so long ago, and he's a British citizen, as we know as well. He said that the UK is no longer a leading nation. He said that while in the past it has advocated for developing countries on issues like food insecurity and climate change, it has now taken a back seat and is leaving those countries to fend for themselves in the face of these extreme weather events. Do you share the same assessment, and what's your response to that as well? And does the West have a bigger role to play that is not playing right now?
I think look, resource partners that have been funding Somalia over the recent years and even beyond that are known. There are some European countries. The US is obviously represent the European Union. Now, on that specific statement, I've seen it in the press actually this morning. I won't comment on that because I don't necessarily have the evidence for that. I mean, the UK is funding interventions activity in Somalia. I can't speak of the UK's positioning elsewhere in the world, and neither will I really comment on that specific comment if it's addressed to Somalia. It hasn't impacted our work as FAO. We are a technical agency. That's really all I can say.
I see no further questions, so I will thank our guest, Etienne Peterschmitt. Thanks very much for your briefing, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And for all of you in the room, please be sure to stick around for the next 5 minutes. There will be a briefing by Dr. Alice Jill Edwards, Claude Heller, and Suzanne Jabour, all part of the UN human rights mechanisms dealing with torture. Thanks very much.